appreciate this, and I found the conversation here to be very useful. And I think you're highlighting the wide range of issues that are on people's minds. I hope there's an opportunity to continue it. Botticelli, how many marijuana overdose deaths were there in the most recent year you have available?
To my knowledge, I don't know if there have been instances of specific overdose-related
deaths. You talked about marijuana deaths, and so I want to be clear. I'm trying to trap you.
No.
How many marijuana deaths have there been in the last 5 years?
So if you're referring to overdoses, I am not sure of those numbers. If you're referring to fatalities,
then I would like to have you supply us with how many overdose deaths there were, because I have heard from experts that judgment I respect, but they don't know of any. So that would be really important for you to provide, at least to me, if not to the committee. What is more dangerous and addictive? Methamphetamines and cocaine or marijuana?
So, I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that there's relative toxicity related to those drugs. But I'm afraid...
What's more dangerous and what is more addictive? Cocaine and meth or marijuana? Pretty simple.
I think that conversation minimizes the harm.
No, I'm not trying to minimize the harm. I want to know which is more dangerous and addictive.
Again, I go back as as a public health person. One of the things that we look at is not what's the relative risk of one drug.
Okay. Let me just say that I think that your equivocation right there, being unable to answer something clearly and definitively when there is unquestioned evidence to the contrary, is why young people don't believe the propaganda, why they think it's benign. If a professional like you cannot answer clearly that meth is more dangerous than marijuana, which every kid on the street knows, which every parent knows, if you can't answer that, maybe that's why we're failing to educate people about the dangers. I don't want kids smoking marijuana. I agree with the chairman. But if the deputy director of the Office of Drug Policy can't answer that question, how do you expect high school kids to take you seriously?
So Representative, I didn't mean to be disrespectful, and I didn't mean to indicate that there is not different degrees of toxicity associated with different drugs.
I asked what was more dangerous. You couldn't answer it.
No.
And I just want to say that you, sir, represent what's part of the problem. Let me go a little further.
So, sorry, that's exactly not what I'm saying.
What kills more people, tobacco or marijuana?
There's been a fair amount of tobacco-associated deaths. My challenge, and the reason I'm hesitating about answering the questions as it relates to relative risk, is I think many times that conversation gets distorted, that there's no risk, that there's...
I'm not trying to trap you.
No. But this is why, Representative, I don't want to be disrespectful.
Let me suggest that your inability to answer me whether tobacco or marijuana is more dangerous, again, is part of the problem. Mr. Connolly documented very clearly that we have been able to drop dramatically tobacco use. And it kills more people than marijuana, if you don't know that. But we've been able to drop that without locking people up, without arresting. I think this administration has seen 3 to 4 million people arrested for marijuana since it's been in office. And yet we've been able to drop tobacco use without being coercive. We've been using fact-based advertising, and we focused our efforts on things that matter rather than things that don't work. And I respectfully suggest that you and the department take a step back. If you're concerned that somehow people think marijuana is benign, that part of the reason is that drug professionals can't communicate in ways that the rest of America does. I appreciate your being here, and I welcome any written follow-up to my questions. Because I'm not trying to trap you, but I'm very discouraged by your inability to answer questions.
So let me tell you, this morning I spent the bulk of my morning with a number of parents from across the country who are doing everything they can do to prevent drug use, and particularly prescription drug use, and many of them whose kids have died of an overdose. And I asked them, what more can the federal government be doing in terms of preventing substance use and preventing the tragedies? And they told me they cannot understand why states are moving to medical marijuana and legal medical marijuana. They cannot understand it because they understand from a very acute level the message that legalization sends them. And these are, so this is not from a bureaucrat in Washington. These are from parents who struggle on a daily basis and have been devastated by addiction in their kids. And they understand in a very dramatic and real way that legalizing marijuana sends the absolute wrong message to our youth.
I thank the gentleman will recognize Mr. Cohen from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With all due respect, you should be listening to scientists. I understand the parents who are grieved because their child died of an overdose. They didn't overdose on marijuana. And you're listening to them rather than the scientists? Mr. Botticelli, it may go back to A Few Good Men, the movie, Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. The truth is the drug war failed. Your direction on marijuana is a failure. Get to dealing, saving kids from heroin overdoses. My young 22-year-old friend died of a heroin overdose. Yeah, he smoked marijuana, probably the first thing he did. But that's not why he smoked heroin or shot it up. Maybe he did it because he heard people like you saying they're all bad, they're all terrible, and you can't deal with the truth. And tell them, well, maybe marijuana doesn't kill you. Heroin does and meth does. They're different. And until you deal with the truth, the kids aren't going to believe you at all. Now, you talked about alcohol, and you may have gotten to this. Cirrhosis of the liver, pretty serious thing. Violence against spouses and women. People don't smoke marijuana and beat up their wives and girlfriends. They get drunk. Sometimes they beat up their wives and girlfriends. And I know you've got your statistics. I would debate your statistics. And if you get into your statistics about the amount of people who had marijuana in their system who were arrested or had fatal accidents, I would submit they probably had other drugs in their system, like cocaine or crack in addition to the marijuana, or they had alcohol. Marijuana wasn't the cause. Because what I understand is people who smoke marijuana, mostly they drive slower and they look out for the cops. They don't drive fast and wild like people do on alcohol and cause deaths. Maybe the reason that so many more people smoking marijuana now is because they're not listening. And maybe they're doing the other drugs too. But it also shows that the drug war has been a failure. It's been a serious failure. Harry Anslinger started. You know who Harry Anslinger is, don't you?
I do not, unfortunately.
He never. Well, you should, because he's your great-grandfather. He started this war in the 30s, and he was tuned out too. And he did it to get the American public had problems, but sometimes I think we still got them with Hispanics and Mexicans coming into this country. And it was a war on Hispanics and African Americans. And that's when they made marijuana illegal, was in the 30s. And it was all directed at those people. And Latinos are just as much discriminated against as African Americans in disparate arrests. It still continues to this day. It's 85 years since Anslinger started this. And it's the fact that we spend so much time arresting people is sinful. You talked about the overall effects of marijuana. Again, you can't name one person who's died from an overdose of marijuana, can you?
That's my own.
Right. And you say the cumulative effects. Do you know people, possibly, or heard of people who smoke marijuana who are corporate giants, run banks, run major corporations? Do you know about these people?
Yes, sir, but I also know an equal number of people. I know a substantial number of people who also have gone on to develop significant disorders who have smoked marijuana. Again, 1 in 9 people who try marijuana develop a dependency, and we know that particularly those kids who use it earlier in their
Kids shouldn't use it. Kids shouldn't use it ever. And at age 18, people shouldn't be arrested for it. Maybe it should be 21. But kids shouldn't use it. That's something we all agree on. But the fact is, we need to put our priorities toward heroin and meth. What percentage of your budget goes towards heroin addiction?
So I don't think we necessarily slice our budget, our demand reduction budget, based on drugs. Again, our prevention efforts are focused on preventing drug use.
Isn't that a mistake when people die from heroin in great numbers? The Vermont governor spends his entire state of the state on heroin use, and we don't distinguish and try to save people's lives. That's when you knock people over at the corner store. It's not to get money to buy a donut because you're high. It's to buy heroin because you're hooked. That causes people to die.
Our office in 2011, I think, acknowledged the burgeoning prescription drug and opiate epidemic that we have in the United States. In 2011, we released a plan that looks at dealing with prescription drug abuse and opiate issues.
Let me ask you, my time's about to run out, and let me ask you one thing. I corresponded back in 2011 with your predecessor, Kirliowski.
Kurlikowski, he's actually the current director now.
Is he? He said back then that there was no particular, they haven't found any medical use. To date, however, the FDA and the Institute of Medicine have not found smoked marijuana to be a safe or effective medicine for any condition, nor has any medical association come out in favor of smoked marijuana for widespread medical use. I think that medical associations have, but are you not aware of the fact that people use smoked marijuana to get them through cancer treatment, nausea?
I do, sir, and it's never been our office's position to either to arrest people who've been using medical marijuana. I think it's important for us, and again, unfortunately, that the FDA is not here. That it's the FDA process that ultimately determines the scientific efficacy of a.
But couldn't you try to influence it? Shouldn't that be part of your job? I had a buddy who was a SEAL. He died of pancreatic cancer. When he was he smoked marijuana at the end. His mother said the only thing that makes oral smile or eat. So that was pretty good.
So our role in this is to rely on the FDA scientific process to determine. That's our influencing role, is to rely on the science. I would also say, and I find it unfortunate, and I think I would ask the chairman to invite Dr. Nora Volkow, who's the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, because that's where our policy and our science is derived from. We are a science-based office and a policy-based office. And I think if you listen to Dr. Volkow, who is not involved in the political discussion around substance use and marijuana, she will lay out for you the scientific evidence that.
Well, let me ask you this: you are prohibited by law from using any funds to study marijuana legalization for medicinal purposes or any other reason. You're the only office of the federal government that's restricted in that way, and you're required to oppose any scheduling of Schedule I substances, rescheduling like marijuana, that have been approved for medical purposes. Aren't you troubled by these constraints, and don't you think that your expertise should be allowed to be used in study science and contribute to a positive classification of drugs?
So I'm not familiar. Congress put that language in our reauthorization, and I'm actually not. I don't know the background of that.
Would you support legislation to allow you to participate and to voice your opinion and to use science as a basis for your determination?
Well, what I would do is support that federal agencies have the ability to do that. So
yours is prohibited by law. Should that restriction not be lifted?
Again, I think we'd have to have subsequent conversation in terms of.
You mean you think you should be muzzled?
I think that it's important that our office not involve itself in terms of given legislation or given activities, and I believe that was the genesis for that language, that the office not involve itself in state.
But the totality of the drug world, you need to participate. And if you realize that medical marijuana, as 20 states have found, can help people with cancer, with nausea, with those maybe glaucoma. I mean, Montel Williams apparently has some benefits from it. Lots of people do. That you should be able to participate and set our drug policy straight. Your job should be to have a sane drug policy, not to be muzzled and